This interview was made possible in part by a grant from Arts DFW.
Museum of American Art in Fort Worth to talk with the co-curators of the exhibition Moving Pictures, Karl Struss and the Rise of Hollywood. With us here is Jonathan Frembling, the Gentling curator and head museum archivist here at the Carter, and Kristen Gaylord, the Hurstville curator of photography and media arts at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Hi, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So to begin, can you give us a brief overview of what the exhibition entails?
Sure. You want me to start?
Sure.
Yes, so this is a solo exhibition of the work of Karl Struss, whose archive, which means his correspondence, but also his negatives and over 2,000 photographs, resides here at the Carter. The museum did a solo show on him 30 years ago, and it was a wonderful sort of early project, but we wanted to do something different with this particular project. We wanted to look at that time when Struss, who is known to art historians as a pictorialist photographer and to cinematographers as a great cinematographer, we wanted to look at that time when he was transitioning, when he was leaving behind his life in New York as a still photographer, went out to Hollywood, and within a short amount of time, less than about a decade, became one of the greatest cinematographers to ever work in Hollywood.
Okay, great. So a little bit about your interests as curators. What kind of brought your attention to Karl Struss again, and then how was it that you developed the exhibition working together to bring this all to fruition?
I'm going to say about 20 seconds on that, and then I want to give the story over to John and his love of Struss. I was going to propose an exhibition at this museum just on Struss's film stills, because that's my area. I'm a photography curator. And my boss sort of let me know that John was also interested in doing a project on Struss, and so we decided to combine forces. But his interest goes back quite a bit farther and is quite a bit deeper in many ways.
It does. So I've been with the museum for more than 20 years at this point, but I essentially cut my teeth as a young archivist, learning my trade, working here at the museum on the Karl Struss papers. When I started back in 2003, we had a broad intellectual control over the papers, but really I was the one who finished processing them. That's going through and carefully describing each object and really doing a deep dive into this material. And I'll admit, I was fascinated from the get-go. I mean, Struss was someone who just had that ability to not only be at the right place at the right time, but he clearly had the talent to excel in those areas. And I mean, I was a novice and I was just agog at just like seeing this unfold in real time. It's like here's in New York corresponding with all the big names in early 20th century photography. And then within just a handful of years, he picks up, goes to the opposite end of the country, the West Coast, and does it all over again. Lands with Cecil B. DeMille. He has his contracts almost right away with the major studios. And then there's all this really wonderful correspondence and ephemera in the archive that tell this really rich story. Things like the movie magazines that come out of his archive, the letters, and production stills in the art collection. So, I mean, it was personal. I have to say, this was a personal exhibition that I desperately wanted to do. I did, and when I landed as the Gentling curator here at the museum, this was a project that was at the top of my list of wanting to do. And so when Kristen's like, "Oh, I'm doing this too," it's like, well, let's make a big show of this. And by pooling our resources, we get to be a bigger show than if each of us had done something smaller, separate. And so I think it really worked out beautifully to create an exhibition that's, well, you'll see.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. So you both talked about how much ephemeral, how many photographs, and how big the collection is. So how do you actually go about picking what ends up in the exhibition?
That's a great question, and it's something that, we were co-curators on this exhibition sort of from those early days, so it was always a collaboration between the two of us. We each have our areas of specialty, and so I defer to John in areas of history and archives. He defers to me in areas of still photography, and that way we were each able to bring our own sort of expertise and the resources of the collection that we knew, because it's so large. you do want someone who knows it well, right? If you have 2,000 photographs and 5,000 negatives, someone needs to be a person who has spent time with the collection, gotten to know it, and sort of can help work things out. So I mean, I scrolled, at least in the database, through every single photograph in the collection. But part of what I did on the sort of the photo side of things was looking at the story we wanted to tell. Because, of course, you know, exhibitions are storytelling machines, right? We were trying to get a point across about Struss. So looking for the best images he made, but also really important images, images that hit particular highlights of his career, sort of, and you know, there's a lot in the show, and there was originally more. You strip away, you edit to sort of just the things that can really capture for the visitor what you're trying to say. And then the archive material is in some ways even harder to wrangle, because with individual art objects, there's historically been a certain value placed on them, so there's more information about each of them in the database and on our records. But when it comes to knowing the archive, there's no way you could do the show without someone who'd done the kind of work that John already had by processing them.
There's so much richness in the collection, and there's surprising little twists and turns that you probably wouldn't expect. You know, there's little stories hidden away. I mean, I love how you can take little seemingly ephemeral nothings, and if you look at it and you go, okay, what's going on at this moment? You know, there's this little slip of paper in the archive. It's just this little note that says, thank you. The most innocuous nothing, but it's signed at the bottom, Jetta Goodall. And it's dated, and when you look at what's going on, who Jetta Goodall is, she's one of these early you know, actresses in Hollywood. She, at that exact moment of that date that's on the piece of paper, is in a fight with Cecil B. DeMille over actors' rights that will ultimately lead to her winning a lawsuit against DeMille as a producer and against the studios that helps really solidify SAG, you know, the Screen Actors Guild, as you know, a way to, you know, get the actors a fair part of the equity of film and what it's doing. And Struss clearly had been helping her kind of as another branch of the you know, kind of movie making process. And there's this seemingly innocuous little nothing that has this whole story hidden behind it. Yeah, that's what's fun about archives, is getting in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say too, in building the exhibition, it is largely drawn from the collection. I don't remember exactly what percentage, but the story is because of the archive here. But there are loans in the show too. There are photographs from the Moving Image Museum in Queens in New York, and there's also a lot of material from the Herrick Library of the Academy Museum in Los Angeles. So the few things that this particular collection couldn't sort of speak to or tell, we were able to get really important loans to build out that story.
To shift gears a little bit to maybe a little bit about Struss's photographs. There's a little bit that talks about the pictorialist kind of mindset that he had coming from New York City, but then the exhibition really focuses on Hollywood. So how is his aesthetic different, and what does he bring to Hollywood from like his pictorialist background?
Yes, I would say, and John knows a lot about this topic too, I would say that one of the things he brings is technical innovation. So his aesthetic style is helpful, but it's not actually, I think, what is most immediately valuable about him to DeMille and the sort of film industry. It's his sort of technical abilities. So he'd invented a lens already that was widely popular and used by a lot of photographers. He had really a lot of skill with lighting particularly, and he helped DeMille and his longtime sort of old guard cinematographer Alvin Wyckoff update their lighting style to what had become more popular at the time, less sort of single light dramatic focus and more of a soft filtered light. He always had a good eye for sort of composition. That's like a baseline. But I think not a lot of photographers, artists, are also so good at that technical side of things. And I think that's something that really set him apart from a lot of the other pictorialists of the time.
And he adapts, you know, and I think that really comes through in the pairings with the big directors of the day. And you know, it's interesting. This is a moment of transition where in early film, the cinematographer was the driver of what a movie was. because you were limited by natural lighting. You know, you had to pick a day literally where the lighting was good enough to get something on film. You were limited by the weather and all these other elements, and so the cinematographer drove what a movie was. And then over this period that Struss comes into Hollywood, the director starts to come to fore. And so he was, Struss, even though he has all these wonderful skills and this magnificent eye, he's always able to adjust to the vision of the director while still bringing those professional skills out. And you can really see that in films where he's paired with American cinematographer or directors like DeMille, but also German expressionists. And in Sunrise, he takes, you can see his early pictorial style coming through in some of the early shots, but then you also get that German expressionist elements in the setup that Murnau is using as the director to convey the ideology or kind of the mindset of the characters. And Struss just runs with it and makes it something beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. So while he kind of comes into this beginning as a fine art photographer, you talk about how he kind of starts to become more of like a technical and adapting to cinematography. But was he actually doing any exhibitions or gallery or museum exhibitions while he was working in Hollywood?
Yes, he was. I mean, he was very busy. He was incredibly prolific, so we didn't have a ton of time. But he was still on the side submitting usually his earlier pictorialist photographs to exhibitions, sometimes to journals. He'd sort of take a prize in a local show, at the camera club show or anything. He always sort of had that on the side. And in the exhibition catalog, actually, we have a chronology that tracks both all of his exhibitions and all of his films. And you see sometimes as the film number rises, the exhibition number tapers off, but especially late in his life, when he's sort of rediscovered by a new generation for his still photography, he gets at it again, and he publishes new portfolios of that old work. And so he always sort of was doing that. It sort of ebbed and flowed with the movie work.
Okay, great. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think that viewers really need to know about the exhibition?
What do you think?
Go for it.
One of my favorite little facts about it now is just how, because people keep sort of asking, like, why now? Why Struss now? And I think he's incredibly relevant still to this day. I mean, there's still a generation of cinematographers who have been influenced by him, especially older cinematographers, and I hope that younger ones, students even, would come to this show and just sort of admire again the adaptability, the wide range of what he was able to accomplish in a long and productive career. And there are these little moments of contemporary sort of connection too. So one of my favorites is how he shoots almost everything when he works personally in a vertical format, which we now do, but for, between when Struss was doing it and now, there was generations of really horizontal sort of emphasized photography, street photography and all of that. And so it was sort of funny to look at the Grand Canyon, which is a broad, vast chasm, shot vertically and think, oh, that's like how an iPhone picture would make that image today. So I do think there's these moments of connection and contemporaneity throughout the show too, which, a lot of the most important work in here was made about a century ago. So that wasn't something I expected coming into the exhibition.
And for me, it's really that bi-coastal ability to really move the needle on what art was. Yeah. I mean, he does it in New York with the Photo Secession group, the Stieglitz Circle, that really says fine art photography, yes, anybody can make a photograph, but fine art photography is something that takes an artist's eye. It is a professional occupation worthy of respect. And then he takes that, goes to Hollywood, and does it all over again with the creation in the Motion Picture Academy. He's there professionalizing this entirely new endeavor of motion pictures. He's a founding member in the technical division. He helps really develop the unions for cinematographers, again, establishing this is a real profession to be respected. But when you talk about contemporary issues, he's about equity, and I think that's interesting. He's the Jetta Goudal note, the creation of unions. It's about making sure that all of the participants in a film are receiving their fair due. He was always really deeply, intensely aware of that aspect. And I just love that final element in his career when he's being, recognized, as being, kind of this elder statesman of movies. He calls out the script girl. as just an example of the kinds of people on set who do the work that actually make that movie real, but are never recognized. He calls these roles out in his acceptance speech, and he writes about it. And I think that's really something that continues to resonate today, where you really have these issues of equity and inclusion and awareness of all of the people, not just the marquee names at the top.
That's true, because still photography is a more solo endeavor, but filmmaking is at its heart and has to be collaborative. And I think that's something that we recognize more and more sort of these days, and Struss is a great example of that. As also he is, most of us hope to reach the pinnacle of our one career, and he did it twice within a couple decades, and so is also just an astounding figure for any time, I think, to appreciate that way.
All right, great. Thank you so much for taking the time to share these thoughts with us. There really is a lot to see in this show.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks.
Find all of our videos and sign up for our newsletter at artthisweek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.